Life, as a 911 dispatcher, is usually hectic. Calls pour in from people in distress, and there's no room for error when alerting first responders. Most of these calls are deadly serious. So when Sara, a dispatcher, answered one from a 5-year-old named Elijah Peterson, the last thing she expected was to have to fight back laughter. But before we continue, smash the like button, subscribe and ring the notifications bell so you never miss our upcoming videos. Anyone who's been around young kids knows phones and children don't mix. They can brick a device in minutes, or, if not, spend that time calling everyone in your contacts. That's one side of this story. The other is the typical high-pressure shift of a 911 dispatcher. And while Sara was trained to handle almost any emergency imaginable, this particular call tested her composure in a very different way. While Sara was on the line with young Elijah, her co-workers quickly noticed something was different. Between what she was saying into the headset and her stifled chuckles, it was obvious this wasn't a typical 911 call. Luckily, all calls are recorded, so when it was over, she played it back for everyone, who found it hilarious. Earlier that day, Elijah's dad had tucked him into bed for his afternoon nap, promising to cook his favorite meal while he slept. Elijah drifted off, excited to wake up to his special treat. But when he woke, there was no meal waiting, and no dad either. Puzzled, he searched the kitchen. Empty. He called out for his father. No answer. Peeking outside, still no sign of him. At only 5 years old, Elijah had never been left alone before. Or so he thought, and the realization left him startled. Unsure what else to do, he grabbed the phone and called 911, landing Sara in one of the funniest calls of her career. If you've ever thought you were alone somewhere, you can imagine what went through Elijah's mind when he woke to an empty house. His thoughts raced. Where was his dad? Was he coming back soon, or not at all? At 5 years old, the situation felt huge and scary. He wondered if it was a joke, but quickly dismissed it. His dad wasn't the joking type. Then hunger reminded him he'd also missed his promised favorite meal, which only added to his frustration before guilt crept in. At first, the idea of having the whole house to himself felt exciting, but that faded fast. He searched every room, closet, and cabinet. No dad. Tears followed as he began to fear no one would come for him. Eventually, Elijah started thinking of a plan. He considered going to the neighbor's house, but the locked door stopped him. Calling for help seemed like the next best option, if only he knew who to call. He didn't know anyone's number by heart, and he'd never even used a phone before. Luckily, he did remember one number his parents had taught him. He remembered that his mum had taught him a really short number, and that he could call it if he ever felt like he was in danger, or if there was an emergency. The number was 911, and he made his way toward the home phone. In his mind, this was the biggest emergency he'd ever been faced with, and he didn't even know for sure that his dad was okay. Elijah grabbed the phone from the wall, and he dialed 911. The person on the other end would end up being Sara. On the day that Elijah called Sara, the operators had only taken a couple of calls. It was slow that day, which was a good thing. That meant that there weren't a lot of people in trouble. Sara and her co-workers passed the time by talking with one another and sharing stories. Little did they know, they were about to see a great story unfold right before their eyes. While keeping an eye on the phones and monitors, the dispatch team stayed alert for incoming calls. Most callers were adults, but when a child phoned 911, it usually meant something serious. When Sara answered Elijah's call, she immediately heard the distress in his voice. Her first priority was to calm him enough to understand the situation. As a trained dispatcher, she knew young children could either dial 911 by accident or be calling because the adults around them couldn't. She needed to determine which it was, and fast, so she could alert the right responders. Gently, she began gathering details, asking about his father. Elijah's description made it clear this was no ordinary emergency report. Not long after she managed to get Elijah to calm down, she began to figure out just what kind of situation she was dealing with. Elijah started asking Sara all kinds of different questions, like if there was a law against promising someone chicken nuggets and not following through. He asked her if she arrests people through the phone and all kinds of random questions you might imagine a toddler to ask. Between trying not to laugh and fielding some of Elijah's questions, Sara managed to get him to tell her about what had happened that evening, leading up to his call. Although Elijah wasn't in immediate danger, Sara stayed on the line to make sure it stayed that way. She dispatched an officer to check on him and kept him calm until they arrived. Elijah's curiosity soon turned the light-hearted call into something even more entertaining, revealing unexpected details that amused Sara and her co-workers. The officers reached the house quickly, and thanks to Elijah's ability to give his address, they confirmed he was safe. Some states have laws against leaving young children home alone, and while it wasn't clear if that applied here, the situation still raised concerns. As police checked the home, Elijah kept chatting with Sara, sharing quirky details that made her nearly laugh out loud. Still, the unanswered question remained: where were his parents? The officers couldn't wait forever, and if no one returned soon, they'd have to take Elijah to the station. Despite the light tone of the call, his decision to reach out for help had been the right one. Luckily, it turned out that Elijah had been great in providing Sara with all kinds of details about his father that she could use in her hunt for his identity. Using Elijah's father's name and his colorful, oddly specific descriptions, Sara quickly tracked down his Facebook profile. What had been a light-hearted call took a more somber turn as she scrolled through the posts. It became clear that Elijah's parents had been going through a messy public divorce for several months. The arguments and tension likely played out in front of him, and his humorous nicknames for his dad now seemed like a child's way of coping with stress at home. While the divorce provided some context, it didn't explain why Elijah had been left alone for so long. Whatever had pulled his father away had to be important, but the reason remained a mystery, one that kept officers and dispatch wondering what they might uncover next. The more Sara looked through the Facebook posts, the more she found referring to the breakup. Elijah's father had posted nearly everything about the breakup on social media, and he didn't seem to care who saw what he posted. Even worse, he said some not-so-nice things about the whole situation, and even some posts that seemed to be aimed at young Elijah. She continued to talk with Elijah while looking through the posts. While answering Elijah's curious questions, Sara continued reviewing his father's social media. Nothing suggested he was dangerous or in trouble, but with no parent returning home, the officers decided to take Elijah to the station. He went willingly, eager for the adventure. Sara felt reassured knowing he'd be safe with the police, but still wanted to meet him there in case he became lonely or the officers needed details from her. Her manager allowed her to leave early, so she copied the call recording and headed to the station. By the time she arrived, police had been trying unsuccessfully to reach Elijah's father, and contacting his mother was proving equally difficult. After hearing about the divorce posts Sara found online, they decided to focus on reaching her first. At this point, contacting the father seemed like an impossible task. The officers were also a bit curious as to why Sara decided to come all the way down to the station. After giving the officers a copy of the call recording, Sara made her way through the station to find Elijah. He was the only child there, sitting with a child protection worker who leaned forward, listening closely as he spoke. Sara stayed back so as not to interrupt, but when Elijah noticed her, he ran over to greet her enthusiastically. They chatted for a moment, allowing her to confirm he was still calm and comfortable. Before long, his attention drifted elsewhere, and he wandered to a corner to flip through a book. The child protection worker then asked Sara to explain what had happened. Sara walked her through everything, from the moment she answered the call to her arrival at the station, making sure to mention the Facebook posts she'd found, and Elijah's playful, curious personality. She admitted she'd come, not only to ensure the police had all the information they needed, but also to check on Elijah and make sure he was okay after the strange and stressful day he'd had. The child protection worker admitted she'd struggled to get Elijah to share much about home, though he'd offered a few playful descriptions of his father. From what Sara had learned during their call, the pieces of his family life were starting to fit together. It seemed likely his father found it difficult to be around him because Elijah reminded him of his mother, which may have led to neglect. Even at his young age, Elijah appeared to understand he wasn't always wanted. Unable to be playful or silly when his father was present, he saved his humor for when he was away, often turning it into teasing remarks as a way to cope. The more Sara and the caseworker tried to reassure him, the more his jokes carried a trace of sadness. Elijah also seemed unusually at ease being alone at the station, which made sense when they learned he was an only child. He even mentioned that waking up alone at home hadn't bothered him at first, a telling sign of how accustomed he might be to isolation. The woman from Child Protection asked if Elijah wished if he had someone to talk to at home, and Elijah replied that he would like to have someone to talk to at home. The more the two learned about Elijah's home life, the more concerned they got. Apparently, Elijah's father completely ignored his son, to the point that Elijah started talking to himself, and even pretending that he was talking to his dad, and his dad was talking back. He'd promised himself that he would take Elijah to Disneyland and fix him chicken nuggets. It was also how he managed to come up with some of his jokes about his father. His father may have been physically at the house most of the time, but emotionally, Elijah may as well have been living by himself, as if his father wasn't even there. After what seemed like a very long conversation, someone finally came into the room where all three of them were, and told Sara and the woman from Child Protection that Elijah's mum was on the way. They said that she'd seemed extremely concerned to learn her son was being held at the police station, and that she had no idea if things were so bad at home. She would be there in a bit. When Elijah heard the news, his face suddenly brightened, and it actually seemed like he was happy to hear it. It was clear that he viewed his mum differently from his father. Both women were curious as to how Elijah ended up with his father when he seemed to loathe him compared to his mother. When his mum finally got to the station, she explained that when the two separated, she gave Elijah the freedom to choose who he wanted to stay with, and he chose his father. Looking back, it wasn't a great choice. That's not to say that there aren't a ton of really great single dads out there, because there are. However, it was clear that Elijah was probably better off with his mom. A couple of days later, snippets of Sara and Elijah's 911 call were playing all over the news. Sara hadn't given it to anyone in the media, but everyone at work and at the police station had access to it. Either way, it was out in the public now, and Elijah's father, who had been found at that point, wasn't happy. The recording didn't paint him in the best light. Elijah's father repeatedly called the station, demanding to know who had leaked the recording, and insisting on speaking with Sara. Why he was upset with the person who had ensured his son's safety was unclear. Still, his complaints went nowhere. Pushing the matter would only draw more attention to his parenting and the circumstances that led to the call. Eventually, he dropped the issue. By then, Elijah was living with his mother full-time, with no chance of being left alone again. The divorce had taken a toll on the whole family, but Elijah had borne the brunt of it. Fortunately, his 911 call brought the issue to light before things could get worse. What began as a frightening moment ended with him in a safer home, with someone who could give him the attention and care he needed. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and ring the notifications bell so you never miss amazing tales like this one.